Let's turn to Alabama, where the Republican-led state legislature passed a near total ban on abortion. The law has no exceptions for rape or incest, only when the mother's health is at risk. Women seeking an abortion would not be punished, but the doctor who performed the procedure could face up to 99 years in prison. Alabama is just the latest state to pursue new abortion restrictions. 8 states have passed laws restricting abortions this year. Joining me now from Montgomery, Alabama, Don Dailey, News and Public Affairs Director and host of Capitol Journal on Alabama Public Television. Don, thanks for joining us tonight.
Hello, and thanks for having me.
Don, what does this law mean for the women of Alabama?
Well, it's been a divisive issue here in the state this week, as you might imagine. Those who oppose this abortion ban have said that for women it means possible backroom abortions from the days of yore and severe setbacks to women's reproductive health rights. And those on the other side, of course, say just the opposite, that it's about preserving life and presenting a test case that they hope goes all the way to the U.S. Supreme Courts.
Was that the legal strategy all along in Alabama? We've heard advocates say, in effect, it was, that they wanted to kick this issue to the highest court in the land.
Indeed, the sponsors of this legislation have said from the get-go that their ultimate goal was a legal challenge, one that they hope goes all the way to the Supreme Court and forces a review of the Roe versus Wade decision. And they said in keeping the abortion ban as restrictive as possible, and again, as you noted, it's being heralded this week as the most restrictive in the country, keeping it restrictive would help their case when and if it goes before the nation's highest courts.
When you're there in Alabama and you're talking to the leaders in the Republican Party who have been pushing this, what's their answer to the question of why now? Why the urgency in going to the brink here on this issue? Why at this moment are they pursuing it?
They feel the time is right on a number of levels. First of all, last year, Alabamians overwhelmingly approved a constitutional amendment that declared Alabama to be a pro-life state. In doing so, Republicans who supported this abortion ban said they felt emboldened to take this step, that they felt like they had the majority of Alabama citizens behind them on this. And then, too, there's the issue about the conservative-leaning U.S. Supreme Court. They feel that the climate is right there, too, now to possibly take up this challenge if indeed this case makes it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. So it was sort of a two-pronged approach they had in initiating this legislation.
Don Dailey from Alabama Public Television. Hope to see you down there soon when I'm covering Doug Jones, his re-election in 2020. Thanks very much, Don.
Thanks, Robert. Nice to be with you.
Good to be with you. He mentioned the Supreme Court. Yeah. Brett Kavanaugh recently confirmed. Is there a thought on the American right inside the Republican Party that this Supreme Court has moved to the right because of the confirmation of Kavanaugh? And that for that reason, this is the moment across the country. We saw Missouri today, yeah, and elsewhere.
You know, this has been part of a broader conservative strategy since about 2012, where we've started to see these legislatures pass these laws very much with this intention of trying to get something to the court to try and overturn Roe v. Wade. The fascinating thing about the Alabama law is that so much the abortion debate is we see it as between right and left. But what I think the Alabama law did was expose divides within the Republican Party on this. And you had leaders of the party, people like House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, coming out saying he thought the law went too far. The head of the RNC coming out saying he thought the law went too far. You've seen intellectuals and influencers in the party debating amongst themselves whether this was advancing the cause or whether laws like this will be thrown out in the courts and ultimately derail the cause, that they're not advancing the policy, and are the politics so divisive that you are actually turning away the voters you're trying to persuade.
Is this now one of the key issues for 2020?
Absolutely. We've already seen it come up with some of the presidential candidates on the Democratic side, because their positions are largely in line and clear. And just to build on what Sue was saying, you know, this is sort of the culmination of several years of chipping away at the protected right for women to get an abortion. More than 400, I think, pieces of state legislation have been put into place over the last several years, and this is the latest acceleration. And it's clear there has been an acceleration. Since Justice Kavanaugh took his seat on the bench, we've seen more restrictive laws going into place. The ironic part is the legal experts I've talked to have said some of these more aggressive, restrictive measures are probably less likely to be the ones that the Supreme Court would eventually even take up.
And we saw Missouri today pass its own new restrictions on abortion.
That's right, and they're coming in all different forms: gestational age bans, fetal heartbeat bans. It's important to note some of even the 6- and 8-week bans we've seen are basically backdoor all-out bans because gestational age is calculated from your period. So if you're 6 weeks pregnant, you've basically been 2 weeks late on your latest period, and that's a business trip for most women. So a lot of these measures are sort of hidden behind language and have been going in place for years and years and years. But it's clear, look, anti-abortion activists think this is their moment in time, 30 plus years in the making. If ever there was a chance they're going to get Roe v. Wade reconsidered, it's now.
Well, one of those longtime activists is Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence. How's this administration, this White House, reacting to this? We heard from Sue that top Republican leaders in Congress are distancing themselves. Is the White House?
Yeah, it's interesting. For now, President Trump and the White House have not sort of fully embraced this Alabama law. They've said very little. They've tried to avoid sort of taking a clear position. Although Vice President Pence has said he is pleased to be part of a pro-life administration, and he's an interesting figure here because he is the connection between Trump and the religious right, the evangelical Christians. And for Pence, the issue of abortion is an issue of real personal conviction, whereas for Trump, it's an issue of politics and political convenience. President Trump was pro-choice before getting into the presidential race as a Republican. Now, of course, he's anti-abortion in line with his party.
You get the sense the president doesn't have a great feel for the abortion issue. Like, there are not a lot of topics that President Donald Trump doesn't feel qualified to weigh in on whether it's Beto's hands or Theresa May and Brexit. He weighs on just about anything at any moment. He's very silent on abortion. He rarely wades in. And this week, the silence from the White House has been deafening. There's one short statement that came out on Wednesday on these bills that are percolating up. The president likes to talk about what a good feel he has for the electorate, what a good feel he has for the economy, the markets, trade, all these deals. He doesn't seem to have that feel in abortion, and he seems to be avoiding the issue.
Maybe not on statements he doesn't have the feel, but on action, he's filled the federal judiciary with many, many conservative judges. The fingerprints of this administration on the issue of abortion and abortion rights, they're everywhere.
That's absolutely right. And I think for people who he is speaking to, he's messaging to in a political way, that's what they want to see. And a lot of Trump supporters I've spoken to over the last couple of years point exactly to that. Well, they may not support anything else he does. They may not like the way he carries himself or conducts himself, but we got our Supreme Court justices, and that's what we were here for.
You mentioned the 2020 race, and we saw Senator Elizabeth Warren come out with her own plan. Is this now the galvanizing issue for some Democrats, at least in the presidential race? Is this move up maybe past the Green New Deal and other things that have been out there for a long time? Is this now about abortion and protecting rights?
You know, I do think one thing to know is that one of the most driving issues in the 2018 midterms were women voters and the issue of health care. And for a lot of women voters, abortion is a health care question. So I think they look at it through that spectrum. I think that Democrats see this also as a way that, I mean, women voters have already been very excited in our political climate, but this is also something that absolutely will continue to galvanize them. I also think it's important when we talk about this, it's not just about women. If you look at polling data on the country's attitudes on abortion, men and women actually track pretty similarly. The views are shared in that a majority of men and a majority of women, roughly the same numbers, think that there should be some legal access to abortion. And then, you know, when you get into what those restrictions are, the numbers shift. So there's not really a gender divide, there's a political divide on the issue. And so I do think Republicans also risk turning off a lot of men who share the views of women and independent men who do not, you know, may believe in some restrictions, but the kind of laws like Alabama are something that just really turn them off to the party as a whole because it is not something that they want to associate themselves with.